All right, welcome. We're in module 2, where we're going to break down the secret philosophy of the so-called secret societies. Now, what we're going to do, what I'm doing here is dispelling something was what I heard, a term I like, what we're going to call a linchpin assumption. What that is that if you have an assumption about a thing that's held together, right, by that you have ideas that are held together by a certain assumption. Once that assumption is removed, all of the other ideas that were held together by that have to be reevaluated. Okay, it's like a game of Jenga. Once you pull the piece from the bottom and the whole tower falls over, I'm sure that's pretty simple to understand. And I've found from experience in this journey that there are some very serious linchpin assumptions in the world that have a grip on people, and that's the goal here today of why we want to uncover or dig into the secret philosophy of the so-called secret societies. Okay, now it's about to get a little weird, or maybe not that weird, but we're not. The goal here is not to get deep into a lot of the periphery, the signs and symbols and all of the history and all of these things. We have to deal with the fundamental issue first, right? To really take the benefit. So let's begin. If I can get my pointer. Okay. Is it going well? Thank you. Now, the secret philosophies of the so-called secret societies and their purpose. Groups like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the other esoteric schools were not created for sinister purposes. Their role throughout history was to pass down deeper levels of knowledge for those who sought wisdom beyond surface religion. Just that simple. This simple phraseology that I just gave you has been articulated by some of the biggest names in occult or esoteric philosophy, such as Manly P. Hall in his book, The Secret Doctrine, or the Secret, what's it called? The Secret Knowledge of All Ages. I forget the name of the book. It's a famous book. And what I found and what eventually opened my mind to what we're about to share is the fact that people will go into that same book looking for their bias, what they want to find, and take out what they think they want to find, and overlook all of the actual clear information that was just right there, not being a secret. Right. The secret doctrine in one statement. The mystery schools taught that the soul is divine and immortal. Reality is patterned after a higher intelligence, and the purpose of human life is to awaken, transform, and reunite with the source through knowledge, quote unquote, gnosis or ma'rifa, right? Through knowledge, virtue, and conscious participation in the cosmic order. So it's through increased quality of knowledge, wisdom, right? A certain knowing of things, not just dogmatically following what someone told you to follow without any thought or genuine relationship with the knowledge at a more coherent level, right? But through knowledge, also virtue. It's not enough just to say I know spiritual stuff. Like today, unfortunately, it's normal for people to say I'm spiritual and not religious. No disrespect if that's you. However, being spiritual without any type of system to adapt your mind, your thoughts, and your actions are not going to align you with the order of the entire cosmos, right? So the dimension that you are experiencing your spirit in is the cosmos, is the universe. If you don't have a system to adapt your mind and your actions to, then how do you know that what you're doing is in alignment with the overall purpose? How do you know what you choose is healthy or unhealthy, constructive or destructive? You really don't. And a lot of people, unfortunately, just end up kind of winging it. No disrespect. I understand. But this is what happens. Because if you're not deriving your virtues, your morality from any particular source or system, it's still going to be given to you by some source or system. It's immutable. It happens one way or another. So If you don't follow this path, you're gonna follow that path. Now that path may not be as virtuous as this path. Nevertheless, the secret doctrine um, of these ancient mystery schools going all the way back through time, this is what it was all about. That's it. It looks strange, but it's only strange because we're unaware of it, and it's a lot of aspects of it that have very logical and simple explanations behind it. However, as we will cover here, the reason why it's perceived this way is because people's unfamiliarity and unwillingness to open their minds to learn. Before we move on, just look at the images here. On the left, you have the Rosicrucian rose cross, right? All of these symbols mean things. Now, this is another misconception. I don't want to get too deep into it here, but this is the misconception that what happens when people who don't know talk about the stuff. They think things, they just make it up. Oh, well, symbols have power. Symbols do have power. But if you remember the last module, the power of symbols is the information behind them. A symbol in and of itself, all by itself, is just a symbol. It's just a shape. The only power comes behind the ideas, the intention, and the action that creates an outcome that come from that symbol interacting with minds. Otherwise, it's just a shape. And you can want to believe it means something or does a thing, but really people who say that they just one, they just made it up. Two, if you learn these philosophies and systems, then you'd be thoroughly convinced that that's what people are doing. People just make stuff up out of fear and ignorance and so on and so forth. Anyway, the rose cross, the rose represents the unfolding of the soul, evolution of the soul, growth, and so forth. On the right, you see a above, right behind my head, you see was a Masonic tracing board. Right, you can see it, and that represents certain philosophical ideas represented in an image so that a person can look at it and contemplate over these things. And I'm sure there's a lot more deep explanation of it. I'm not a Freemason, um, and nor am I what you call it, a scholar of Freemasonic philosophy. So I'm sure there are going to be things I don't know about it, of course. However, much of the information is available free now on the internet. I know that a tracing board is something that's made to represent these ideas, these concepts, these frameworks, these philosophies, so that the individual can wrap his mind around it, right? And symbology is to help the mind see the ideas, attain the gnosis, attain the ma'rifah in Arabic, right? Attain that level of knowing versus just saying and claiming to know. But that's not the topic of this module. This module is to expose people to the lies so that they can appreciate the truth. How did the lie gain popularity? This man was not the first person to tell the lie, but from what I looked up, he's the one who kind of made it go viral in his time. In the 1800s, a French satirist named Leo Taxel fabricated a story claiming that Freemasons worshipped Lucifer. The story went viral across Europe even after he admitted it. Even after he admitted it was a hoax, the idea had already taken root and spread as a fact. This was, in fact, what they call fake news, right? This is a fake story. That man behind me, he made it up. That picture over there of the goat, that was made by a philosopher and a magician named Eliphas Levy, another French individual. So, but this guy behind me, he fabricated this idea that the Freemasons worship Lucifer, and that was the image of what they actually worshipped, right? If what I'm saying to you now is uncomfortable, good, because you've been had, as I had, until one day I finally decided to look past what everybody claimed. Um, so the lasting power of the lie, despite the confession, because he later confessed, right? That's how we know it was a lie and he made it up because he basically he was like let's say for modern terms he's like a blogger, right? Or yeah, like a blogger. And he wrote a blog. He made up this whole big elaborate story about you know joining the Freemasons and actually knowing a Freemason who had admitted to him that they actually worship Lucifer. And if you see the image that I'm sure that's one of, I'm not sure. I believe that's one of the images that he used, right? Kind of showing, alleging the Freemasons worshiping Lucifer. But this is a fabrication. He just lied and he admitted it later on. But even after he had admitted it, and you can look all of this stuff up. And if you need, give a link. My goal is, like I said, this is quick and dirty. Um, even after he admitted it, it went viral. Like people didn't want to hear anything else. They believed it and they wanted to believe it. And it became very popular and became almost accepted as a fact, even though it's not. It's a fact that it's a lie and it's a fact that it's a made up story. But there are other facts that most people don't care to delve into and utterly refuse to acknowledge that is actuality a fact. And I'm gonna say this before I move on. What really changed my mind about this, because I used to be the biggest conspiracy theory guy and believe all of these things, is when I was bold enough to just actually read the books of these groups for myself to see what they said about themselves versus what other people say. So when I saw that what they said about themselves was so uncharacteristic and far and different from what people said about them, it became clear, oh, the lie must actually be it must be true that they are actually lying, because when you read the books, they'll quote a book. Like they'll quote Manly Hall's book. They'll quote Albert Pike's book, right? Morals and Dogma. They'll take one line out of an 800-page book and determine the whole definition of the book from one line in its 800 pages. But there may be 100 other lines that totally contradict that one line, right? And the one line that they use as a proof to say that they worship Lucifer is wildly out of context and not even accurate. So after seeing that, I was like, oh, okay, move on then. And that's what I'm hoping to do for other people, because once you remove that linchpin, then you are able to go and reevaluate a whole bunch of other ideas that you had misunderstood. And I remember the rise of the conspiracy culture. Now, I was into conspiracy theory even before the internet got popular, before we had mobile phones, before YouTube existed, and so forth, right? Because as you can see with um, Leo Taxel, the lie he told, that was all the way back in the 1800s. However, it really got mainstream when YouTube came out, and I saw it. I watched it in real time. Because, like I said, I was already into conspiracy theories. But with the explosion of YouTube around 2008, conspiracy theories about the Illuminati and secret societies became viral. Millions absorbed the narrative that these groups were sinister, reinforcing misinformation. And you can see the screenshot I got here with Beyonce. That was one of the videos I used to watch back in the days. You can see you probably can't see it's too small. That's a 12-year-old YouTube video, right? And it was catching it went viral. People was, YouTube was still new. It was so many people making all of these videos and connecting all of these dots that didn't really fit together, but nobody really knew. Unfortunately, many unsuspecting people watched these videos and it just became a normal part of the cultural consciousness. People just believe it as a fact. It is actually not a fact. And most times you can't even get people to think other than that. Unfortunately, you see the images here with Jay-Z, and they say, "Oh, well, Jay-Z is throwing up the Illuminati sign." There's not an Illuminati sign. His partner Damon Dash admitted that sign is actually supposed to represent a diamond, right? That was supposed to represent that they were going to become billionaires, right? That's where Jay-Z got the hand sign from, and people adapted it to the eye on the dollar, and then they said that that meant the Illuminati, which it doesn't, right? But unfortunately, because of the lie, and sorry about my notifications, y'all. Because of the lie and its persistence, you can't get people to reevaluate and think that maybe it may be something different, right? And I'll say this before I move on. Now, I understand that a lot of people have consumed a lot of this conspiracy theory content. If you're never willing to question your assumptions, how would you even know if you've been lied to? How would you know what propaganda looked like if you're not even willing to believe that it's possible that maybe you've been propagandized, which in actuality I realized that much of this information was just, in fact, propaganda, right? Where people would edit things in a very special way to put across a certain idea and narrative. And if you're skilled at editing, you can shape perception very, very easily. But that's what took place. What these secret societies actually represented in truth. In truth, these organizations were places where humanity's deeper wisdom was preserved. They gave serious students access to the mysteries of knowledge, philosophy, nature, and spiritual truth that the general population never received. We're going to back up. This image in the middle is I believe it's called piercing the veil. Why that image is important is because it demonstrates a person's consciousness extending beyond the material world and becoming aware of the greater dimensions in which consciousness is a part of, right? However, a person's consciousness can only go there, going to following a certain path and doing certain things, right? And that person has to be willing and want to. With these ancient traditions that go back far longer than any of us know, that's essentially what they were for, to help people pierce the veil of reality truthfully, not just claiming it, not just, oh, I astral projected yesterday and all of these things. It's a lot more serious than that. Meaning, in objective reality, there is more objective reality, even higher, even beyond our eyes and ear senses. But our consciousness is an entirely different sense. And, you can sense the higher reality, with the proper training and the proper methodology. That's what the mystery schools essentially help the person do. And that's all it was about. It was never about worshiping the devil, Lucifer, anything evil, anything against, the morals and theological foundations of most major religions. It's not that. It was just, it has become so weird looking that people have a visceral reaction to something that they're not used to. We are very dogmatic. I see something that looks different than what I know, and it's crazy because you think about that. It's like, what do you really know? You know very little. You know very, very little about one of my favorite quotes from Fast Eddie. I know a little about a little, but I don't know a lot about a lot. So if you see this image here with the temples and the three doors, right? Those temples are found in Mexico, Egypt, Indonesia, and India. And those are the doors. And the reason why it's highlighted is because it represents an archaeological, what's the word? An archaeological lineage of these practices going back into a long, 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 long time ago, right? Egypt probably being one of the oldest civilizations to have these archaeological artifacts that represent this philosophy. That's essentially what I'm saying. And you see the picture here of the temple that says AMRC. That's a Rosicrucian temple. That's in California. But you see the image below it, you can tell it's patterned after what was in Egypt. Why? Because it's patterning behind the philosophical um the philosophical tradition of aligning with the purpose of the cosmos and universe and the immortal soul and these things. That's all it is. And you see these different initiation rooms. They look strange, right? You grew up in a church, they don't look like my church, right? You grew up in the masjid, the mosque, it don't look like that. No, it doesn't. But it's not necessarily evil either. But when your only orientation to approaching these ideas is that it's evil, you will never be able to separate the concept of this from evil. But that's actually not the case. Here you see more of what I just showed you. You got a temple in Mexico or Egypt, India, Cambodia, and China. Now, below that, you see modern architecture, right? With the same, what's called a triptych temple or triptych framework, right? Now, all of the credit for these images with these three doorway symbols goes to Richard Casaro, the author of the book called Carved in Stone. Richard Casaro, he gets the credit. You see his name in the image right over there on the under Africa. It says richardcasaro.com. He really did the work in bringing together all of these archaeological information and images so that we can see that there is actually a connection between the ancient world and modern world, these mystery schools. Masonry is derived from some very ancient religion. At what at what period in antiquity or what nation this religion was first established is lost to the labyrinth of unrecorded time. That's according to Thomas Paine, talking about the origins of Freemasonry. Nobody really knows. There's a lot of evidence for all of this, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about just understanding fundamentally that it's not what you thought. That's all it's about. Right. And you see these images. So now in the world, when you go out in the world and you see these three, you see doorways and windows, right? Look here and you see on the left, those cathedrals in Europe were made by the medieval Freemasons who were actual, I forgot what they called them. There were Masons who were you know not philosophical. They didn't actually build with their hands. Then you had the real Freemasons who actually really did build real buildings, right? It's a whole evolution of the story of the thing. But those real cathedrals in that image, you see they have that certain architecture pattern after the architecture of the pyramids in Africa, in the Americas, and in Asia, right? Why? Because, it represents the philosophy. They were building symbols of the philosophy into the buildings. Mystery schools across time. The existence of schools of mystery has always been a part of human culture. They were the bridge for seekers to access higher truths that ordinary religious practices could not fully communicate. So, as Manly Hall said in his book, there has always been, according to him, a religion for the outside, the regular people. But then for the people who wanted to go deeper, there was another whole area that you can go and learn the really deeper truths. Meaning, it's one thing just to say, oh, I believe in, you're just a regular person. You ain't really that deep in thought and you're not really that deep in spiritual practice. But then for those who really want to go deep and align with the truth and gain higher and higher levels of consciousness and understanding, there was a place for that in the ancient world. It's kind of lost in modern times. And unfortunately, the great lie that I mentioned before played a huge part in it. But as you can see in the middle image, the lost universal religion of the triptych temple. That's what Richard Casaro called it. I don't call it that. But was the founding wisdom of all secret societies. Now, I agree with him on that. I wouldn't phrase it universal religion. You could phrase it that way. I like to say universal philosophy because it's deeper than merely religion, right? And I don't want to disrespect anybody's particular religion because I know that's a sensitive topic and most people don't have the philosophical acumen to really navigate this topic. Anyway, the idea that it was all of the secret so-called secret societies are about the same thing. This one philosophy, the immortality of the soul, the oneness of the creator, and what else? Yeah, the brotherhood of mankind. We all live here together. And that's the reason why it's an organization because it teaches people how to work and be virtuous and be a good citizen and things of that nature. Then you see here on the right, you see Cambodia. That temple has the same style of architecture, and even in China. So when you see this trilateral architecture, right? This represents it's a symbol of philosophy, the combinations of three. That's not what this video about. We're gonna have to do that elsewhere. That represents something very significant once you know it. However, I'm showing this to show that it's a real thing. This ancient philosophy that represents these very simple ideas of the immortality of the soul and the nature of reality as a simulation, as we discussed in the last module. So the consequence of misunderstanding. By maligning those schools as evil, society has been misdirected away from their actual purpose. Ironically, these places where humanity stored its answers about existence have been labeled off limits by lies and fear. So now people are afraid to know, and they've been lied to and misdirected from knowing profound truths that could answer a lot of questions and help a lot of people. In short, the mystery schools were engines of spiritual evolution. For the initiate, they offered the path they offered the path from mortal ignorance to divine union. For society, they safeguarded higher knowledge, distilled it into more palatable information for the masses, and ensured a stable moral and cosmic order by raising leaders who understood the deeper pattern of existence. In the ancient times, like in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, the goal of the priest in the mystery class, they had the deep wisdom. They were the scholars, right? They understood science and theology and philosophy. They were scholars of every field. They existed so that they can be a part of society to help keep society, on the right path. And the reason why it was safeguarded is because if a person who doesn't know any better gets the wrong information, then they can misunderstand what they don't understand. And then they go and spread misinformation to everybody else. And then people walk around with the wrong idea. So then you have minds with information that's wrong, false information. So how then could they align with truth and reality when their information is wrong? They can't. And that brings about a whole gamut, a whole variety of destruction. Now, look at the world we are in today. We think that the problems we see in the world today is like some disease that just floats out of the sky. It's like some natural occurrence that the world is messed up in certain ways because the world is not messed up in other ways, right? So the people are lacking certain wisdom of how to conduct themselves and act and operate with one another in the world. And we think it just happens naturally. It does not, because we human beings are the agents of the Most High, of the supreme source of intelligence and life. We have a responsibility to act a certain way. But when we don't know that, that's how we end up as lost as many people may be. So that's a short, not that short, but a short module. Like I said, you have to understand. Oh, now dealing with simulation theory, the scientific aspect of it, right? Mhm. How is the mystery schools related to the science? It's because you don't know how to merge scientific awareness and spiritual consciousness into one thing. We've made it separate. It's become separate because of secularism, materialism. It has divorced the material world from the non-material so-called spiritual foundations and purpose. The mystery schools help the people keep them together and help the initiate or the person who wanted to learn these concepts and put them together. Once you can put them together, that unlocks the ability to rise higher and higher levels of understanding, far beyond what's normal today. And that's essentially what's the purpose. And that's essentially what's been the problem and what I'm trying to help uh, change now. So that being said, thank you for module 2. Catch you on module 3. Please leave a comment, question, reference, help, whatever. Peace.